let's start with Gronk. Hall of Famer.
Yes.
I mean, this isn't even a question, right?
Well, apparently it is because...
Listen, let's not even... I think I know who the guy in question is.
Well...
I think it's Ron Borges of the Boston Herald. Do you want to know his history?
Sure.
It's just Mr. Contrarian.
This is what I'm saying.
That's just what he does.
The only way you could come at that take of Gronk may not get in the Hall, I don't know if I'd vote for him, is being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian.
Right.
Like, nobody could actually look at his resume and believe that. And if you actually look at his resume and you believe that, your Hall of Fame vote should be given up and handed to one of those game-picking octopuses that you see that, like, pick the World Cup, choose which fish-related morsel next to a country's flag will win this game.
They get your vote.
That guy should get the vote. That octopus should get the vote instead of the person that believes that Gronk is not a Hall of Famer.
Well, that might be Ron. I mean, Ron's history is like the Patriots win the Super Bowl 13-3, and not that impressive. They should have won by 20. That's kind of his take. Oh, 6 Super Bowls? Well, it easily could have been 10. Left a bunch on the table.
Yeah,
that's kind of his shtick. Was a big fan of. They really missed on David Terrell by picking Richard Seymour over him.
Yeah.
So it's just a history of like he's just an anti-patriot is what he is. So I'm just assuming that's him. So regardless, I don't want to argue with trolls, but let's state our case. I mean, Gronk is a clear first ballot Hall of Famer, maybe the best tight end of all time.
Yeah. I mean, first ballot is pointless to me, right?
That's just a description.
You're either a Hall of
how...
Famer or you're not. The first ballot thing is basically determined by what the landscape looks like the year you come up.
But it's used as a descriptor for how strong your case is.
To me, it's silly. You're either a Hall of Famer or not. Gronk is clearly a Hall of Famer. Let's run through some numbers, shall we?
Let's do it.
In the PFF era, if you like, so 2006 onwards, there have been 7 seasons from a tight end that have earned a PFF grade of 90 or more. The first 6 of them are Gronk. So he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 6 of the 7 90-plus grades. The only other one is Tony Gonzalez. That's pretty impressive right off the bat. The other thing is, so I tweeted last night, which kind of riled some people up, that Gronk basically had no comparable peers throughout his entire career. Now, there were other good tight ends. You've got Travis Kelce, you've got Jimmy Graham for that period before he fell off and then went to the Seattle and fell off even more. You've got Greg Olsen, who's been a great tight end for the Panthers. Those 3 in particular have been really spectacular players. They have not been comparable peers to Gronk.
No, not at all, because of the all-around nature of his game.
Maybe as receivers for a while, each one of those has been able to rival him. Maybe. But none
even
of
then,
them.
I think there was a point where Gronk, as receivers, like a 2-year period, where it was like a viable debate.
Yes.
I don't think Greg Olsen was ever truly Greg Olsen had a ton of volume and was a very good player.
There's a couple of seasons, I think, where Greg Olsen is in that conversation.
Kelce versus Gronk for a couple of years, maybe, again, as a receiver.
So each one of them, as a receiver, for a couple of years, have had seasons that rival Gronk, right? Greg Olsen became the first tight end ever to have like 3 back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons, which, I mean, okay, that's great, but honestly, that just says more about you were there for 3 straight seasons healthy, I mean,
that's pretty much the biggest knock on Gronk's career, right?
Like Gronk would have had that if he hadn't got broken during that course. But if you just if you just look at the 3 closest to full seasons, it's the same. You know what I mean? So it's not a stat I would be leaning my case on. But the point is, all 3 of those guys, A, they didn't have the kind of longevity to do it over an extended period of time. Kelce still has time to do it, so he could get there. B, none of those guys have been the kind of blocking threat that Rob Gronkowski has been. And the reason that matters, so we're coming at this from a world of saying the run game doesn't matter, nothing, blah, blah, blah. None of that is consequential anymore. But the reason that stuff matters is because the single hardest players on offense to defend are guys that put you in a personnel problem, right from the get-go. Before they've done anything, there is an issue with how you treat them from a personnel standpoint. And there are players like Aaron Hernandez was when he would carry the ball in the backfield. Ty Montgomery, where he moved from wide receiver to running back. Le'Veon Bell, going the other way, can move from the backfield out to wide. Those guys cause real problems for defenses because as soon as they come on the field, as soon as they're in the huddle, you have to look at them and decide how you're going to treat that guy. Do you treat him as his actual position, Or do you treat him as a receiving weapon and put a defensive back on the field and the issues that causes? Gronk was that all the way throughout his career because he was such a threat as a dominant blocking tight end. He could block like an auxiliary tackle that you go, okay, well, I'm going to put a safety on him. That safety is going to get annihilated by Gronk in the run game. So now you have a real problem because what would have been 3 yards in a cloud of dust turns into 8 yards because the safety just got destroyed and Gronk's bought him a clear path through to the second level. So Gronk was a better blocker than all of those guys at any point in their career and for longer. And with guys like Graham and Olsen in particular, those guys have been bad blockers.
Well, and Gronk put up monster run blocking grades, which you guys can see in your PFF Elite package, premium stats. He put up really good run blocking grades, and they were challenging him. You know, a lot of tight ends, they get put in the slot and they're split out wide all the time. The point you're making is, well, the Patriots lined him up in line. They used him as an H-back in motion. They put him in the backfield every now and again, but he was on the line blocking defensive ends quite often. Or their little wham block that they like to run on nose tackles and all that stuff. Gronk was great at it.
Gronk also owns the top 2 run blocking grades we've ever given tight ends.
So there's some perspective.
So there are tight ends that are there literally just to run block, have no receiving purpose whatsoever. The third guy on that list is Ben Hartsock, who basically ran like 45 pass patterns the year where he was...
Right, he was legitimately just an extra tackle.
He was an extra tackle as a blocker. 45 pass patterns is the game for a tight end, and he ran that in a season. Gronk has 2 seasons that are better run blocking grades than Ben Hartsock had. So even if you just want to limit it to a blocking tight end perspective, Gronk is the best we've ever seen since 2006.
Plus, when you add up all the postseason accolades, you know, when he was healthy and on the field in the postseason. Now, again, this works for and against Gronk, but here are the years where he was healthy throughout the entire postseason. 2010, Patriots were one and done. That was his rookie season. 2011, he got hurt before the Super Bowl, tried to limp through the Super Bowl. 2012, got hurt in the AFC Championship game, so he was out there. 2013, out in the playoffs, was not there. But 2014, his first healthy season, they win the Super Bowl. 2015, he was healthy, they lose in the AFC Championship, so he's essentially 1 for 3 in healthy years winning Super Bowls. 2016, he was hurt down the stretch. They won it without him. 2017, they lost in the Super Bowl. He had a monster game. So are they 1 for 4 now? And then they were 2 for 5 because last year he was healthy. You know, so I mean, he's had 5 healthy postseason runs, 2 of which resulted in Super Bowls, 1 Super Bowl loss, a couple AFC Championship losses.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that really makes him stand out from everybody else is that he was a blocker in an era where, in order to make tight ends these incredible receiving weapons, they basically sacrificed blocking. So guys like Jimmy Graham,
Antonio Gates.
You could write a list of these, all the great receiving tight ends, with the exception of Gronk, over the last sort of 15 years, have all not been good blockers. Teams have gone, you know what, it's actually not that valuable. If we get a guy that's a matchup weapon as a receiver, we'll live with the fact that he's a bad blocker. Gronk was basically the only guy over that stretch who said you can have both. You can have the dynamic receiver and a guy who can block, like old school tight ends, in a way that nobody else has been able to do over that stretch.
I like the way my somewhat relative, Doug Kyde, who's on the New England Patriots beat. Do you know we're related?
I've heard the relation, and I'm not even ever going to attempt to commit it to memory.
So he married my wife's stepmom's cousin's daughter.
Yeah.
Right. So we're related, Doug and I,
right,
by marriage. But Doug, covers the Patriots, and I thought it was an interesting take because he said if Gronk was doing all of his antics, all of his fun off the field stuff that he does, that most people think it's fun. Imagine if he was doing that not with the Patriots. You would immediately say, oh, this guy would never play with the Patriots.
Right.
But they made it work. The Patriots who have the Patriots way and, this, structured, here's how you have to do it, versus Gronk, who likes to do his own thing off the field. But when it came to, doing interviews and all that stuff, he pretty much fell in line. I think you almost have to just credit both sides that they kind of made things work. And I think that also speaks to how great he was, that the Patriots would adjust a little bit to some of his quirks.
His touchdown kind of rate is also pretty absurd, particularly for a tight end, but for any receiver.
Before you mention it, so this is the biggest thing, right? When you have Hall of Fame debates, you debate the the rate type of stuff, the per game type of stuff versus longevity. I think there are two ways to get into the Hall of Fame. Longevity is important, and then true dominance is important. I think when you're talking true dominance, there is no peer when it comes to tight end in the history of the NFL. When it's Rob Gronkowski, the most dominant tight end.
Certainly, the best anybody else could do is match that. But he is tied for 28th in the NFL's all-time touchdown receptions list, right? And he only played for 9 years.
Wow.
And he didn't play for 9 years.
Injured.
Right.
And injured
because he only played in the NFL for 9 years, but how many of those did he actually play?
Right.
So that's an absurd rate. He's 2 touchdowns behind Steve Smith, who played for like 15 years. He's right there with Calvin Johnson, who had a similar kind of period, but Calvin Johnson is arguably the most dominant wide receiver that's ever played in terms of his peak. So these are the guys that you're looking at in terms of touchdowns, and he's a tight end, a position that typically hasn't got all the touchdowns.
Like, how many career touchdowns does Jason Witten have? He has more than Witten, doesn't he?
Yeah, let me find Witten.
So like Witten's a guy, as soon as Gronk got into the league, the immediate comparison was like, oh, he's Jason Witten, because Jason Witten was not as good as a run blocker, but he was willing to mix it up, and he was challenged the same way. Gronk surpassed him as a run blocker.
Witten has 68 touchdowns, so 11 fewer than Gronk in, 5 more years?
Yeah, at least 5 more years. The debate of, true dominance over a shorter period of time, and we're still talking 9 years, the better part of 9 years, right? Just like if Gronk went out there and stumbled through 4 more average seasons just to accumulate stats, I don't think that should necessarily enhance his Hall of Fame credentials.
To me, it's a better case walking away now than it would be to have 4 crappy years at the end of his career.
Yeah. And that's so like what Witten did at the end of his career, 77 catches, 75 catches, 63 catches, but you're talking like 9 yards a pop during those years. I mean, Gronk could roll out there and do that and have a bunch of years of 70 catches, 9 yards a pop, a few more touchdowns, and just accumulate stats. But that shouldn't necessarily enhance your case. And that's not like Witten's peak was really, really good. It was outstanding. But that's, say, the difference between a Gronk versus a Witten versus maybe Tony Gonzalez was still playing at a pretty high level his whole career.
I think for Gronk, it's a great time to go because, you've fairly well established a Hall of Fame career, credentials-wise. You've got Super Bowl rings, which is the thing most people are usually chasing when they're deciding whether or not to hang them up.
Right.
You've literally got nothing to play for, right? You've made the millions, you've got the rings, you've got a Hall of Fame resume. All you're doing at that point is trying to burnish your record further and risk injury. And as a guy who's already had a lot of injury.
He claims he's only lived off his endorsement money.
Right.
And that he's essentially pocketed his $60 million that he's made from the NFL. That's impressive.
So, he's a guy who doesn't have anything to keep going for. The only thing he could do is to hang on for as long as he could and see how far up that list he could put himself. But you're never going to put yourself number one because, that's Jerry Rice, who's never going to get called because he hung on for like 45 years.
He did.
The best, if you're looking at Gronk, the best you could reasonably hope for is to chase down Tony Gonzalez, who had 111 career touchdowns. So he could get that, but it's probably going to take him 5 more years of physical punishment. And is that worth it to get yourself just one ahead of Tony Gonzalez?
No, because Raw's in Boston tonight. So he's just going to go show up, WWE Raw.
Okay.
That's why the timing's perfect.
I'm just saying, I think it's a good time to walk away. Oh, he doesn't have a reason to keep going.
Yeah.
The way a lot of players do.
I completely agree. Let's put a bow on it. Okay. When you look at the Patriots dynasty or dynasty, Sam, it's this 18-plus year run, but I think there is kind of a line drawn in the sand where the Patriots were starting to fall off a little bit around 2009, and the 2010 draft was just a franchise-changing draft for them that started the whole second part of the run, so to speak. That was when they got Gronk, and they got Devin McCourty, 2 guys that have just been obvious, very important pieces in 3 more Super Bowl wins. They did get Aaron Hernandez that year. They did get guys like Brandon Spikes. Spikes contributed a little bit. Hernandez, of course, we know the tragedy there, but he was on his way to being a major impact player too. But I think that 2010 draft, Gronk and McCourty, kind of set the wheels in motion for the second half of the Patriots dynasty for this whole decade as well. To me, that's another part of Gronk's legacy. And, the Patriots offense has evolved every which way, and he was a big part of them evolving to a 2 tight end offense. And then when they went spread, it didn't matter because, like you said, he could do everything. He can line up in line and create mismatches in the run game. He can line up out wide and create mismatches in the passing game, and they used him as such. So,
yeah, I don't think there's been a more dominant player during his career, probably in the NFL. Like, he's right up there with the Aaron Donalds, the J.J. Watts for that brief period, the Tom Bradys. Like, there aren't comparable peers to Rob Gronkowski. That's the only point I would make. There have been other great tight ends during his career. There have been no comparisons to what he's done.
All right, Rob Gronkowski, an easy slam dunk Hall of Famer. There's no questions asked.
If you're not voting for him, your vote goes to an octopus.